We interrupt your regularly scheduled programming to bring you guys this Quickcaster's breaking news update. The situation in the Middle East, it's just taken a dramatic turn for the worse. Israel has officially launched airstrikes against targets within Iran.
Yeah, we're getting confirmation from multiple sources, including videos circulating social media showing explosions in Tehran, and the Israeli Defense Forces have also released an official statement.
This is a major escalation in a conflict that has been simmering for weeks, as you know. Back on October 1st, Iran launched a barrage of nearly 200 missiles targeting Israel. The world has been watching anxiously to see how Israel would respond.
And the response has come in a very decisive and perhaps unexpected way. The fact that explosions are being reported in Tehran, the Iranian capital, that's particularly significant.
Let's go to the audio. Here's a clip of the IDF spokesperson confirming the strikes and laying out their justification. So the IDF is framing this as a direct response to what they called relentless attacks from Iran and its proxies across 7 fronts. It's interesting that they're highlighting this idea of 7 fronts instead of simply saying they're responding to Iranian attacks.
Yeah, that's a good observation. The use of the phrase 7 fronts is likely a deliberate attempt to emphasize the scope and complexity of the threat that Israel perceives itself to be facing. It's a way of saying this isn't just about Iran itself, but also about the network of groups and allies that Iran supports.
That makes sense. Can you break down these 7 fronts for our viewers?
Certainly. We're talking about direct attacks from Iran, attacks from Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and potentially other Iranian-backed groups in places like Yemen and Syria.
Hold on. Syria too. Are we seeing confirmation of Israeli strikes in Syria as well?
Yes, it was mentioned in the IDF statement, and other sources are corroborating it. This adds another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation.
This feels different than the usual back and forth we see between Israel and Hamas or Hezbollah.
Absolutely. What's happening now is a direct confrontation between 2 nations, both with very advanced military capabilities. The potential for this conflict to escalate rapidly and dramatically is very real, and we need to remember the human cost of this conflict. It's already horrific. The death toll in Gaza alone exceeds 42,000. with over 2,400 dead in Lebanon.
Those numbers are just staggering. And if you've been following our coverage, you know that we reported earlier this week that the U.S. was aware that these Israeli strikes were coming. We have sources on both the Israeli and U.S. sides confirming that. This raises a lot of questions. What are the ramifications now that Israel has taken the step of directly attacking Iran? What kind of response should we expect? And what role might other major players like the U.S., Russia, or China play?
Those are all critical questions. And unfortunately, it's still too early to say for certain what will happen. However, I can offer some insights based on what we know about Iran's capabilities and its history of responding to perceived threats.
Please do. Our viewers are relying on us to make sense of this rapidly evolving situation.
Iran possesses a formidable military, including a vast ballistic missile arsenal and significant cyber warfare capabilities. They also have a long history of using proxies to carry out attacks, which makes predicting their response even more difficult.
So what can we expect? Will Iran strike back directly?
Any response from Iran will have to be carefully calculated to avoid further escalation. But we can't rule out any possibilities at this point.
This is all very concerning. Is there anything the international community can do to try and de-escalate the situation?
The international community is already urging restraint. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was actually in Israel this week trying to broker a ceasefire. But these latest attacks make that outcome seem even more distant.
So what should we be watching for as this situation unfolds?
It's important to remember that the Middle East is a critical region for energy production, and any prolonged conflict could have major implications for oil prices and the global economy. This, coupled with the risk of drawing in other world powers, makes this situation one that demands close attention.
We're back with more on this developing situation in the Middle East. The Israeli airstrikes on Iran have sent shockwaves through the international community, and the world is now waiting to see what Iran will do next.
It's a tense situation, and any miscalculation could have catastrophic consequences. Iran has several options at its disposal, and understanding those options is crucial to predicting what might happen next.
You mentioned earlier that Iran possesses a formidable military. Can you elaborate on that? What are some of the specific capabilities that make Iran such a dangerous adversary?
Certainly. When we talk about Iran's military capabilities, we need to consider both conventional and asymmetric warfare. On the conventional side, Iran has a large standing army, and a significant arsenal of ballistic missiles. These missiles have a range of up to 2,000 kilometers, putting Israel and U.S. bases in the region well within their reach.
That's concerning, especially given the recent missile attacks on Israel. But you also mentioned asymmetric warfare. What does that mean in the context of Iran?
Asymmetric warfare refers to unconventional tactics that aim to exploit an enemy's weaknesses. In Iran's case, this includes a sophisticated cyber warfare program and a network of proxy groups across the region.
So Iran could launch cyber attacks against Israel or its allies, or it could use groups like Hezbollah to carry out attacks indirectly.
Exactly. Iran has used these tactics in the past, and it's highly likely they would employ them again in this situation. For example, Iran could target critical infrastructure in Israel, like power grids or financial systems, causing widespread disruption and chaos.
That sounds incredibly disruptive. And what about the proxy groups? How could they be used in this conflict?
Hezbollah, based in Lebanon, is one of Iran's most powerful proxies. They have a large and well-trained militia, and they possess thousands of rockets and missiles, capable of striking deep into Israeli territory. Hamas in Gaza is another group that receives support from Iran. They could also increase their rocket attacks on Israel, putting further pressure on the Israeli government.
So even if Iran doesn't respond directly with its own military, it could still inflict significant damage and casualties through these proxies.
That's correct. And this makes predicting Iran's response even more challenging. Will they choose a direct and overt response? Or will they opt for a more covert and deniable approach through their proxies? Or perhaps a combination of both? It's too early to say for sure, but it's crucial to keep all of these possibilities in mind.
It's a complex and dangerous situation, and it feels like the stakes are incredibly high. You mentioned earlier that the U.S. was aware of the Israeli strikes beforehand. Does that suggest the U.S. might be drawn into this conflict more directly?
The U.S. has a long-standing commitment to Israel's security, and they have a significant military presence in the region. However, the Biden administration has also been trying to revive the Iran nuclear deal and has been urging restraint on all sides.
You're referring to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, which was negotiated back in 2015, but then abandoned by the Trump administration in 2018.
That's right. The JCPOA placed limits on Iran's nuclear program. In exchange for the lifting of sanctions, the Biden administration has expressed a willingness to return to the deal. But talks have been stalled for some time now.
So the situation is incredibly complex. We have this conflict between Israel and Iran, the possibility of Iranian proxies entering the fray, and the stalled nuclear negotiations all happening at the same time.
It's a volatile mix of factors, and it's difficult to predict how things will unfold.
This is all a lot to absorb. It's a rapidly evolving situation, and there's still so many unknowns.
Absolutely. We're dealing with a complex web of relationships, historical grievances, and strategic calculations, and unfortunately, there are no easy answers.
Let's talk a bit more about the potential consequences of this conflict. You've already mentioned the impact on oil prices and the global economy.
Yes, that's a major concern. The Middle East is a crucial source of oil, and any disruption to supplies could send prices soaring, leading to economic instability around the world.
And we can't forget the human cost of this conflict. We've already seen thousands of casualties, and the situation could deteriorate further.
Absolutely. The human toll is often overlooked in these discussions about geopolitics and strategy, but it's the most important factor to consider. Behind the headlines and the political maneuvering, there are real people whose lives are being shattered by this violence.
We need to remember that. What are some other potential consequences that we should be aware of?
This conflict could further destabilize the region, leading to increased tensions and the possibility of spillover into neighboring countries. We could see an influx of refugees, exacerbating an already dire humanitarian crisis.
And what about the risk of other countries getting involved? You mentioned Russia and China earlier.
Both Russia and China have interests in the region and are watching the situation closely. Russia has been a key ally of Iran, while China has been deepening its economic ties with both Iran and Israel. If the conflict were to escalate significantly, it's possible that either or both of these powers could be drawn in, either directly or indirectly.
This has the potential to spiral out of control very quickly. What can be done to prevent that from happening?
The international community must act swiftly and decisively to de-escalate the situation. This includes urging restraint on all sides, promoting dialogue and diplomacy, and working to revive the Iran nuclear deal.
Those are all important steps, but they seem incredibly challenging given the current level of mistrust and animosity.
There's no doubt that it will be difficult, but it's essential to prioritize peace and stability over escalation and conflict.
On that note, let's shift gears a bit and delve into the historical context of this conflict. You mentioned earlier that the animosity between Israel and Iran predates the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Can you elaborate on that?
Certainly. While the Islamic Revolution marked a turning point in the relationship between the two countries, the roots of their animosity go back further. Before the revolution, Israel and Iran under the Shah had a somewhat cordial relationship. Iran was seen as a key ally of the West in the region, and they share common interests, particularly when it came to containing Soviet influence.
So they were on the same side during the Cold War.
In a sense, yes. But after the Islamic Revolution, everything changed. The new Iranian regime, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, viewed Israel as an illegitimate state and a symbol of Western imperialism. They cut off diplomatic ties and actively supported groups opposed to Israel, like Hezbollah.
That's when things really started to heat up.
Absolutely. The Iranian Revolution fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, and the rivalry between Israel and Iran became a defining feature of the region.
And this rivalry has played out in a number of ways over the years, hasn't it?
It certainly has. We've seen proxy wars, covert operations, assassinations, and a constant war of words. The conflict has also been fueled by the development of Iran's nuclear program, which Israel views as an existential threat.
Right. We talked about the nuclear issue earlier. So how has this long history of rivalry shaped the current situation?
Decades of animosity and mistrust have created a highly volatile environment. Any incident, like the recent missile attacks and airstrikes, has the potential to spark a wider conflict. The historical baggage makes it even more difficult to find a peaceful resolution.
It's like they're trapped in a cycle of escalation.
In many ways, yes. And breaking free from that cycle requires a fundamental shift in mindset, a willingness to move beyond past grievances and seek common ground. It's a tall order, but it's not impossible.
Let's hope they can find a way to do just that. But given everything we've discussed, it's hard to be optimistic.
It's certainly a challenging situation, and there are no easy solutions. However, it's important to remember that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for peace.
We're back with our continuing coverage of the breaking news out of the Middle East. The situation remains incredibly tense following the Israeli airstrikes on targets inside Iran. We've explored the potential ramifications of this escalation, the various players involved, and the historical context of the conflict.
It's a complex and multifaceted situation, and as we've discussed, there are no easy answers.
Right. But we can't just throw our hands up in despair. What are some potential paths forward? What can the international community do to try and de-escalate this situation and prevent further bloodshed?
That's the million-dollar question. The first step, as always, is dialogue. It's crucial for all sides to come to the table and engage in meaningful negotiations, even if it's difficult and uncomfortable.
But given the level of mistrust and animosity, how can we even get them to sit down together?
It won't be easy. It will require a concerted effort from the international community, particularly from those countries with influence over the parties involved. The U.S., for example, could play a key role in facilitating dialogue between Israel and Iran.
What about the other major powers like Russia and China? Do they have a role to play?
Absolutely. Both Russia and China have a vested interest in stability in the Middle East, and they could use their leverage to encourage de-escalation and dialogue. A joint statement from the UN Security Council condemning the violence and urging restraint could also send a powerful message.
That's a good point. A unified front from the international community could help to de-escalate the situation. What about the specific issues at play? We've talked about the Iranian nuclear program, the role of proxies, and the historical grievances. How can those be addressed?
Addressing these issues will require a long-term commitment to diplomacy and a willingness to compromise. The nuclear issue, for example, has been a major sticking point for years. Reviving the JCPOA or negotiating a new agreement could help to ease tensions and build trust.
But that seems like a long shot right now.
Yeah.
Especially after these latest attacks.
It's certainly a challenge, but it's not impossible. There are experts on both sides who understand the technical aspects of the nuclear issue and who could work together to find solutions. It would require political will and a genuine desire to reach an agreement, but it's worth pursuing.
What about the issue of proxies? Iran's support for groups like Hezbollah and Hamas has been a major source of tension with Israel.
Addressing the issue of proxies will be complex. It requires understanding the motivations and grievances of these groups and finding ways to address them peacefully. It also requires Iran to change its behavior and stop supporting these groups militarily and financially.
That seems like a tall order.
It is, but it's important to remember that these conflicts are not intractable. They are the result of human choices and human actions, and they can be resolved through human effort and ingenuity.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed and pessimistic given the current state of affairs, but you're right, we can't give up hope. What can our viewers do to stay informed and engaged on this issue?
Staying informed is crucial. Seek out reliable news sources from multiple perspectives. Don't rely on just one source for your information.
That's great advice. And what about engagement? What can our viewers do to make a difference?
Contact your elected officials. Let them know that you're concerned about this conflict and that you support diplomatic efforts to resolve it. Support organizations working for peace and humanitarian relief in the region. And most importantly, stay engaged. Don't let this issue fade from the headlines. The more attention we pay to it, the more likely we are to find a peaceful resolution.
Those are all great suggestions. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us for this Quick Caster's breaking news update. It's a complex and evolving situation, and we'll continue to provide updates as they become available. Be sure to head down to the comments section below to share your thoughts and discuss the developing situation. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.